Your grandmother had a secret that could feed your family through any crisis. While we're throwing away wilted vegetables every week, she knew exactly which vegetables could last decades without spoiling. These weren't just garden varieties. These were survival vegetables that kept families fed through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and every harsh winter in between. Today, we're uncovering 20 vegetables your grandmother stockpiled that literally never expire, and some of these will completely change how you think about food storage. Number 20, dried corn. Let's start with something your grandmother treated like gold: dried field corn. This isn't the sweet corn you eat off the cob. This is the hard, starchy corn that could feed a family for months. Properly dried and stored corn can last indefinitely, and your grandmother knew it was one of the most reliable food sources on earth. She'd buy corn by the bushel during harvest season, then spend days shucking and drying every kernel. During the Great Depression, dried corn kept families alive when other foods were scarce or too expensive. Grandma could grind it into cornmeal for bread, cook it whole for hominy, or even pop it over the fire for a special treat. She'd store it in metal containers with tight-fitting lids, often adding bay leaves to keep the bugs away. Smart grandmothers knew that a few bushels of dried corn in the basement meant their family would never starve, no matter how tough times got. Number 19, dried beans. Walk into any grandmother's root cellar, and you'd find mason jars filled with dried beans of every variety. Navy beans, pinto beans, black beans, kidney beans. She collected them like precious gems because she knew they were protein powerhouses that could last forever. Properly stored dried beans remain viable for decades, and some have been found to still cook perfectly after 30 years in storage. These weren't just cheap protein, they were insurance policies against hunger. Grandma could take a handful of beans, soak them overnight, and create a hearty meal that would stick to your ribs for hours. During World War II, when meat was rationed, beans became the foundation of family dinners. She'd buy them in bulk during harvest season when prices were lowest, then store them in airtight containers where they'd wait patiently to feed the family through any crisis that came their way. Number 18, dehydrated onions. Your grandmother's strings of braided onions hanging in the root cellar weren't just for show. They were survival food that could last through the harshest winters. But even better were her dehydrated onions, sliced thin and dried until they were crispy. These dried onion flakes could last indefinitely and added flavor to any meal when fresh vegetables were nowhere to be found. Grandma knew that onions were more than just flavoring. They were medicine and preservation all in one. Dried onions could be rehydrated for cooking, ground into powder for seasoning, or even eaten dry as a snack. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were luxuries, dried onions turned bland beans and rice into meals worth eating. She'd slice onions during the harvest, then dry them on screens in the attic where the heat would remove every bit of moisture, creating flavor that would last for years. Number 17, dried carrots. Carrots were your grandmother's secret weapon against scurvy and malnutrition. She knew how to slice them thin and dry them until they were like orange chips that could last indefinitely. These dried carrots retained most of their vitamins and could be rehydrated for cooking or eaten dry as a nutritious snack. Grandma treated dried carrots like vitamin pills that actually tasted good. During World War II, when fresh vegetables were hard to come by, dried carrots provided essential nutrients that kept families healthy. Grandma would slice carrots during the peak of harvest season, then dry them on screens or string them up like orange necklaces. She knew that properly dried carrots could last for years and still provide the nutrition her family needed. A jar of dried carrots in the pantry meant her family would have vitamins even in the depths of winter. Number 16, Dried peas. Split peas and whole dried peas were staples in every grandmother's pantry, and for good reason. These protein-packed legumes can last for decades when stored properly, and they were the foundation of countless hearty soups and stews. Your grandmother knew that a pot of split pea soup could feed a family of 8 for less than $1, and the peas would be just as nutritious years after harvest. Grandma understood that dried peas were more than just soup ingredients. They were complete nutrition that could sustain hard-working families. During the Depression, pea soup became a weekly staple because it was filling, nutritious, and incredibly cheap. She'd buy peas by the pound when they were in season, storing them in airtight containers where they'd remain ready to become soup, stew, or even ground into flour during the leanest times. Number 15, dried potatoes. Your grandmother knew the secret of turning fresh potatoes into food that could last for years. She'd slice potatoes thin, blanch them briefly, then dry them until they were like potato chips. These dried potato slices could be rehydrated for mashing, added to soups for thickness, or even eaten as snacks. Properly dried potatoes could last indefinitely and still provide the carbohydrates that kept families energized. During the Irish potato famine, families who knew how to dry potatoes survived while others starved. Grandma learned these lessons and applied them to her own food storage. She'd spend weeks during potato harvest, slicing and drying bushels of potatoes that would feed her family through any emergency. Smart grandmothers knew that dried potatoes took up a fraction of the storage space of fresh ones, but provided the same nutrition and satisfaction. Number 14, dried cabbage. Cabbage was your grandmother's vitamin C powerhouse, and she knew exactly how to preserve it for year-round nutrition. Dried cabbage might not sound appetizing, but it was a lifesaver during long winters when fresh vegetables were impossible to find. She'd shred cabbage fine, then dry it until it was crispy, creating a vegetable that could last indefinitely and still provide essential nutrients. This wasn't just about nutrition. Dried cabbage was also incredibly versatile. Grandma could rehydrate it for coleslaw, add it to soups for flavor and vitamins, or even eat it dry as a crunchy snack. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were luxuries, dried cabbage provided the vitamins that prevented scurvy and other nutritional diseases. She'd process entire heads of cabbage during harvest season, creating jars of dried vegetables that would last for years. Number 13, dried beets. Beets were your grandmother's secret to surviving winter without losing her health. She knew how to slice beets thin and dry them until they were like ruby-colored chips that could last forever. These dried beets retained their natural sweetness and most of their nutrients, providing both flavor and nutrition when fresh vegetables were just a memory. Grandma understood that beets were more than just root vegetables. They were natural medicine that could boost energy and improve health. Dried beets could be rehydrated for cooking, ground into powder for natural food coloring, or eaten dry as a sweet snack. During World War II, when sugar was rationed, dried beets provided natural sweetness that made other foods more palatable. She'd harvest beets at their peak, then spend days slicing and drying them for storage that would last through any crisis. Number 12, dried turnips. Turnips were your grandmother's insurance against hunger, and she knew exactly how to preserve them for long-term storage. Dried turnips might not be glamorous, but they were reliable nutrition that could last indefinitely. She'd slice turnips thin, blanch them briefly, then dry them until they were completely moisture-free, creating a vegetable that would remain edible for decades. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were expensive or unavailable, dried turnips provided essential nutrients and could stretch any meal. Grandma could rehydrate them for mashing, add them to stews for bulk and nutrition, or even grind them into flour during the most desperate times. She knew that turnips were hardy vegetables that could grow in poor soil and harsh conditions, making them perfect for both fresh eating and long-term storage. Number 11. Dried sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes were your grandmother's candy that never went bad. She knew how to slice sweet potatoes and dry them until they were like chewy, sweet chips that could last for years. These dried sweet potatoes retained their natural sugars and most of their vitamins, providing both nutrition and satisfaction when other foods were scarce. Grandma understood that sweet potatoes were more nutritious than regular potatoes and much sweeter than most vegetables. Dried sweet potatoes could be eaten as snacks, rehydrated for cooking, or even ground into flour for baking. During World War II, when sugar was rationed, dried sweet potatoes provided natural sweetness that made other foods more enjoyable. She'd harvest sweet potatoes after the first frost, then spend weeks slicing and drying them for storage that would last through the longest winters. Number 10. Dried squash. Winter squash was your grandmother's vitamin A powerhouse, and she knew exactly how to preserve it for year-round nutrition. She'd slice squash thin, remove the seeds, then dry it until it was completely moisture-free. These dried squash pieces could last indefinitely and still provide the vitamins that kept families healthy through long, dark winters. This wasn't just about nutrition. Dried squash was also incredibly versatile. Grandma could rehydrate it for cooking, grind it into flour for baking, or even eat it dry as a sweet snack. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were luxuries, dried squash provided essential vitamins and natural sweetness that made other foods more palatable. She'd process entire harvests of squash, creating stores of nutrition that would last for years and keep her family healthy no matter what challenges they faced. Number 9. Dried parsnips. Parsnips were your grandmother's secret root vegetable that could survive any storage condition. She knew how to slice parsnips and dry them until they were completely preserved, creating a vegetable that would last indefinitely and still provide the complex carbohydrates that kept families energized. Dried parsnips had a naturally sweet flavor that made them popular even with picky eaters. Grandma understood that parsnips were hardier than carrots and could grow in conditions where other vegetables failed. Dried parsnips could be rehydrated for cooking, added to soups for sweetness and nutrition, or even ground into flour during desperate times. During World War II, when fresh vegetables were hard to find, dried parsnips provided essential nutrients and natural sweetness that improved the flavor of other stored foods. Number 8. Dried rutabagas. Rutabagas were your grandmother's survival vegetable that could outlast any crisis. These hardy root vegetables could be sliced and dried until they were completely preserved, creating food that would last indefinitely. Grandma knew that rutabagas were more nutritious than turnips and could provide essential vitamins even after years of storage. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were expensive or unavailable, dried rutabagas provided reliable nutrition that kept families healthy. Grandma could rehydrate them for mashing, add them to stews for bulk and flavor, or even eat them dry as a crunchy snack. She'd harvest rutabagas late in the season when they were at their sweetest, then spend days preparing them for storage that would last through any emergency. Number 7. Dried leeks. Leeks were your grandmother's sophisticated onion that could be preserved for years of flavor. She knew how to slice leeks thin and dry them until they were completely moisture-free, creating seasoning that would last indefinitely. These dried leeks provided the mild onion flavor that made simple foods taste like gourmet meals. Grandma understood that leeks were more than just flavoring. They were nutrition and medicine all in one. Dried leeks could be rehydrated for cooking, ground into powder for seasoning, or added to soups for flavor and vitamins. During World War II, when fresh vegetables were rationed, Dried leeks provided the flavor that made other stored foods more enjoyable and nutritious. Number 6. Dried celery. Celery was your grandmother's flavor enhancer that could be preserved indefinitely. She knew how to slice celery stalks and leaves, then dry them until they were completely preserved. These dried celery pieces provided the distinctive flavor that turned simple soups and stews into satisfying meals that tasted like they came from a restaurant kitchen. This wasn't just about flavor. Dried celery was also packed with nutrients that kept families healthy. Grandma could rehydrate it for cooking, use it as seasoning, or even eat the leaves dry as a salty snack. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were luxuries, dried celery provided the flavor and nutrition that made other stored foods more palatable and nutritious. Number 5. Dried peppers. Peppers were your grandmother's spice cabinet that never went bad. She knew how to string up hot peppers and sweet peppers, drying them until they were completely preserved. These dried peppers could last indefinitely and provided the heat and the flavor that made simple foods exciting and delicious. Grandma understood that peppers were more than just seasoning. They were packed with vitamins and could preserve other foods naturally. Dried peppers could be ground into powder for seasoning, rehydrated for cooking, or eaten whole for those who could handle the heat. During World War II, when spices were expensive or unavailable, dried peppers provided the flavor that made rationed foods more enjoyable and kept families interested in eating. Number 4. Dried tomatoes. Tomatoes were your grandmother's vitamin C powerhouse that could be preserved for year-round nutrition. She knew the secret of slicing tomatoes thin and drying them until they were like leather, creating concentrated flavor that could last indefinitely. These dried tomatoes provided the taste of summer even in the depths of winter. This wasn't just about flavor. Dried tomatoes were packed with nutrients that prevented scurvy and other diseases. Grandma could rehydrate them for cooking, eat them dry as snacks, or grind them into powder for seasoning. During the Depression, when fresh vegetables were expensive, dried tomatoes provided essential vitamins and the flavor that made other stored foods more enjoyable and nutritious. Number 3. Dried mushrooms. Mushrooms were your grandmother's umami secret that could be preserved forever. She knew how to slice mushrooms thin and dry them until they were completely moisture-free, creating concentrated flavor that would last indefinitely. These dried mushrooms provided the meaty taste that made vegetarian meals satisfying and delicious. Grandma understood that mushrooms were more than just vegetables. They were natural flavor enhancers that could make any meal taste richer and more satisfying. Dried mushrooms could be rehydrated for cooking, ground into powder for seasoning, or added to soups for depth of flavor. During World War II, when meat was rationed, dried mushrooms provided the savory taste that made meatless meals more satisfying and enjoyable. Number 2. Dried herbs. Herbs were your grandmother's medicine cabinet and spice rack all in one. She knew how to harvest herbs at their peak and dry them until they were completely preserved, creating seasonings and medicines that would last for years. These dried herbs provided the flavors and healing properties that kept families healthy and well-fed. This wasn't just about cooking. Dried herbs were essential medicine that treated everything from upset stomachs to respiratory problems. Grandma could use them for seasoning, make teas for healing, or even create poultices for wounds. During the Depression, when doctors were expensive and medicines were luxuries, dried herbs provided the healing that kept families healthy through any crisis. Number 1. Sauerkraut. At the top of our list is something truly special: sauerkraut. Your grandmother's fermented cabbage wasn't just preserved, it was actually more nutritious than fresh cabbage and could last for years when properly made. This wasn't just pickled cabbage, it was living food that provided probiotics and vitamins that kept families healthy through the longest winters. Sauerkraut was your grandmother's secret weapon against scurvy and digestive problems. The fermentation process created vitamins that weren't even in the original cabbage, and the beneficial bacteria helped digest other foods and fight off illness. During long sea voyages, sauerkraut kept sailors healthy when fresh vegetables were impossible to find. Grandma would make barrels of sauerkraut every fall, creating food that would not only last through winter, but actually improve with age, providing nutrition and flavor that got better the longer it was stored. These 20 vegetables prove that your grandmother was the original prepper long before it became trendy. She knew how to turn fresh garden produce into food that would outlast any crisis and keep her family healthy through the toughest times. From dried corn that could last decades to sauerkraut that actually improved with age, these vegetables are your connection to a time when families knew how to truly prepare for anything. Make sure to subscribe for more forgotten wisdom from America's greatest generation, and check out the next video on your screen to discover more secrets your grandmother knew that we've completely forgotten.